How do you paint black on miniatures? Painting the color black on miniatures, especially on cloaks or cloth, can be hard to make look good. But with a few simple tricks and techniques, it can be very fast and effective to paint a realistic looking black color on your models. Hey, welcome back to Tangible Day. I'm Andrew, and in this video I show you how to paint the color black on your miniatures. Miniature painting is an art, and in any art form there's a skill in sharing how we perceive the world. But there's also a trick in creating that illusion of what's actually real and what is perceived. The color black is hard to paint realistically because in part in nature, the color black isn't really a color at all, and it's actually pretty hard to find a pure black color out in the world. I mean, if you want to see the color black, a real black, just turn off the lights and close your eyes. That's black. So let's paint black. There are two tips you should follow to make it easy to create a compelling realistic black color on your miniatures. The first rule is to not use a pure black base coat. Instead, use an off black color to start your base layer. Start with a color like a very dark gray, or make your own off black color by mixing in a brighter color like blue, and I'll show you that in a moment. The second rule for painting a realistic black on any miniature or model, including cloaks or capes, is to make sure that more than 50% of the visible area is actually visible as black. What I mean is, don't over highlight your black surface on your model. Make sure the non-black color covers less than whatever you want your surface to remain black. As an example, here I'm going to paint the cloak on this Imperial Fist Space Marine black. Of course I start with a prime model, and I have a video showing you how I prime miniatures quickly using an airbrush or a regular brush. Since this is a video about how to paint black on miniatures, I'm not going to focus on the other colors that I painted on this model, but I'll just fast forward through much of it so you can get the big picture of how the black looks in the context of the rest of the model. Because as you'll see, as I mentioned earlier about art, a lot of this is illusion, and so to really understand how black works, you need to see all of it, all the other colors together with the black paint. Well, not pure black paint. Anyway, check it out. So here you can see me base coating the yellow. This is Citadel's Averlin Sunset Yellow, and I'm applying it using a big base coat brush. It doesn't really matter. You'll notice me using a dabbing motion. It's the same type of motion for painting any base coat using a brush. Oh, I also do a quick highlight using a dry brush approach on my yellows, but there's another video on that. Check out the links in the description below. You'll also notice I'm pretty messy, and that's okay. So it only took me less than 10 minutes to do 3 of them like this. Now on to the black. So in this case, I'm using an Army Painter War Paints Matte Black base coat, but again, as I mentioned earlier, we don't want to use a pure black paint. So in this case, I'm going to mix this black paint with ultramarine blue, or in this case, a deep blue from Army Painter. And this creates a very dark gray called Payne's Gray. Payne's Gray is an excellent base coat color for painting anything black because it's an off black color, but has a very cool, darkish tone that makes it easy to keep that realism going with black paint. Anyway, to make Payne's Gray, all you do is mix the black and the blue in a 1-to-1 ratio. And here I'm adding a little water to keep it thin so it flows off my brush a little bit easier. And here, just to show you what the Payne's Gray looks like, here's pure black on this white plain primed card here, plastic card, and then the blue side by side. And then here's the Payne's Gray, that mix of black and blue together. It's a very, very dark gray. It looks almost black, which is perfect, but because it's not a pure black, you'll find it a lot easier to use when you actually use it on a model. So you can see the Payne's Gray that we made using the blue and the black mixture 1-to-1. As a very dark gray, this will actually make it a lot easier for you to create a realistic looking black paint color on your model. Whether you're painting cloaks, capes, armor, this Payne's Gray color that I use makes that job a lot easier. Of course, you can mix your black paint, your pure black paint, with any color you like to create your own off black color. But I like using Payne's Gray because it's simple, it gives that neutral, cool tone to blacks, and adds that little subtle interest that make black interesting on your models and not cartoony. To start, I base coat the entire surface that I want to look black with this Payne's Gray, this dark gray paint that I made. I'll speed it up so that you can see the whole process. The brush you use for our base coating doesn't really matter so much as long as you can apply the paint in even layers. The key with base coating any model, of course, is to use thinner layers rather than one thick layer. And so it might take 3 to 4 coats of this base off black color to really create that smooth undercoat before we move on to the next step. In this case, I thinned the paint pretty much to a pretty transparent level, so it might take a few, in this case, to work quickly. A little pro trick though, the more water you add to a paint, the faster it will dry, but the less coverage it'll give you. Anyway, for this piece to do the base coat, it took 3 or 4 coats of the Payne's gray that I made to create an even base layer. It looks pretty black from a distance, but in real life, this is just a very dark gray. And as it dries, it'll lighten up that color. Paint always looks darker when it's wet. Alright, here's a common question. How do you highlight black? Well, there are many ways to do it. I just take a lighter gray. This is a dark sea green from Vallejo. And I'm going to apply it using a dry brush. Now, in terms of choosing what kind of color to use for highlighting your black, it actually doesn't really matter, but my tip here is to use a neutral color like a light gray, an off-white like ivory, anything kind of just in the neutral part of the color spectrum. So I chose the dark sea green from Vallejo because it's easy to dry brush. So I use a dry brush that I found off Amazon to highlight the black base layer that I painted. To dry brush, I simply load that paintbrush with that gray paint, that dark sea green, as you can see here on the bristles there, and I dry it off on that paper towel. And using a sweep swirling motion, scrumbling as I called it in another video, I lightly dab on the dry brush gray paint over the raised surfaces of the model. Because it's cloth, the raised surfaces are pretty broad, so dry brushing this is really easy. And it's okay if you get a little bit of that gray on areas you don't want. You can always clean that up later. Anyway, I'm going to fast forward here because this is pretty straightforward dry brushing. So now remember that 50% visible rule I shared with you. When you're highlighting, make sure most of that undercoat, that Payne's gray you painted, still shows through 50% over that visible area of the cloak. Don't add too much of the highlight or you'll lose that black appearance. For really strong contrast, here's a subtle tip too. You don't add more highlight over more surface area, just make that highlight color brighter. So that gray color, that dark sea green, you can add a little bit of white to it like I did here, and highlight in a smaller and smaller area over your miniature. And what this does is make sure that most of that surface still has that dark Payne's gray or that off black color underneath showing through. Of course, you might be saying to yourself, this doesn't look black, it looks gray. And you would be right, but we're not done yet. Allow all of these layers to dry, and then you're ready for the next step to really turn this into a compelling, realistic looking black cloak or surface on your painted miniature. The final step for painting black on your miniatures is to apply a wash, which I find the most fun and also the simplest step in this entire process. And I use a Citadel shade, Nuln Oil, for most of this work, although you can make your own, or you can buy other hobby brands of shades or washes that you can apply in the same way, as long as it's black. You can also use black acrylic ink, like those you put in your fountain pen or for drawing, but they're a little more complicated in that you have to mix them with additives to have them really work well. To apply the black wash or shade on your model, just apply it liberally straight from the pot, directly over that black cape or that surface you want to have black. You can let the shade pool into those recesses where it'll darken the shadows even more, and this helps create the contrast over that black painted surface. Also, if you thought your highlights were too bright, this wash step will fix all that and darken all your highlights. It's really fun because you see your black color emerge really quickly. After you apply the wash, make sure it dries completely before touching it. And if you want to apply more, you can do that to darken everything further. That's what the cape looks like after applying the wash and allowing it to dry. It might need another layer just to darken it even further to really make it look like black. But you know what to do now. Anyway, for the sake of time, I painted the rest of the miniature, and I'm going to put the finishing touches on this by using Vallejo texture paste. It's great stuff for finishing a base on a model realistically and quickly. You just apply it with a plastic spatula or some type of implement. And when it's dry, it looks great, it's realistic, it's durable. And here's the model finished with the black painted cloak. What do you think? I really like it. I'm sure some of you have questions or comments. I'd love to hear them. Leave me a comment below. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.